I'm Michael Lane. I'm the president of Liftport Group. We've been doing these shows for about 4 months now, and our focus is on that intersection, that kind of merging point between space, always space, but infrastructure development, national policy, the money and finance of space, current events, and the movers and spacers that are building this future for us out into space. We've had some terrific guests so far. I really want to say thanks to all those folks. And we have some great folks lined up. We've got Matthew Travis coming in next week on Monday. He's a pretty fascinating guy. His background is in, he was in a business plan competition that my friends at the Center for Space Commerce and Finance hosted. And he went from business plan competition to starting that business to building that business and actually being venture funded with, I think, 35 or 40 employees now. So pretty remarkable success story for him. You know, the world has an awful lot of rocket companies. So the assumption is, and we heard it from Rick Tomlinson just yesterday on our Red Planet Live Mars Society show that we did yesterday, you know, his assumption is there's over 160 rocket companies of one kind or another, one flavor or another, and that only 20 of them will make it. I actually think his numbers are quite a bit wrong, but don't want to start an argument with our guest. That was on Ashton Zest's show yesterday with Red Planet Live. So definitely check that out from yesterday. But Matthew's going to come in and talk about why his company is going to be one of the ones left standing. So that's coming up. We've got Dr. Namrata Goswami coming in about a week and a half. I think we've got two others booked, but I'm kind of drawing a blank on who they are. We've got a bunch in the works. Peter Gerritsen, we're going to talk about him quite a bit here in a moment. And with that, I think that's kind of all of our big announcements. We are going to push our big conference out. We were aiming for the end of March, and it probably is not going to come together that quickly. So that's a little frustrating, a little disappointment on that front. But we think that the show's definitely going to happen. It's probably going to be more likely May. We're looking at maybe the end of May. Take a look at the DareGreatly.space website for updates on that. But we're looking at the end of May. I think that's going to work, and that is going to be a 2-day conference with just some tremendous content in there. It's going to be focused on the money of space and the business and hardware of space. We're using the Seraphim Capital space economy roadmap, and that's pretty important. Like that's got all of the big companies in the sector, and we're going to be bringing in a bunch of them together. So that should be super fun. We're very excited about that. But because of that change, we did decide we're going to postpone for a little while. We've got the Mars Society's Red Planet Live show coming up on a monthly basis now. I was hoping to have some good news for y'all this morning. I can't quite share it yet, so we're waiting to get some answers with a new client, but that could be really exciting. We're looking forward to them as to this organization as being a regular contributor, maybe weekly, probably weekly. So fingers crossed about that. That would be another terrific space-focused show. We'll get into those details once we actually have the paperwork to back it up. So just fingers crossed until then. And we've got a couple other projects in the works, so that's been pretty fun. We're submitting into the Small Business Administration for a project here on Thursday. So busy week. It's a busy week for our team. So thanks a lot, everybody, for being a part of that. And with that, we're gonna kind of get into the bulk of the show. I've got some space policy elements that we're going to do. Everybody who watches the show knows that we tackle space policy in the beginning of our show. We've got our guest. We'll have him join us in about 5 minutes, but I want to showcase a couple documents that have come across my desk this week. Not related to our guest. We'll bring in Arun Kumar here in just a moment. But quick things to give you highlights for news. Let me do a quick screen share here. You've all heard me talk about Starship Singularity for more than a year and a half now. My friend Peter Garrettson, retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, he was pretty instrumental in the creation of U.S. Space Force. In the background, he was in the background of the creation of U.S. Space Force. He was pretty instrumental in the development of space-based solar power, involved with Air Force Research Labs efforts, and he's now at the American Foreign Policy Council. So this document, he literally posted it an hour ago, so I haven't even had a chance to take a look at myself. I'll post the link to it. But this is his perspective on what's going to happen. I've been calling it the Starship Singularity for about 2 years now. It's fascinating. The graphics are fascinating. Again, I don't want to claim that I've read it because I haven't. But Pete and I have been talking about this for 2 years. So I'm just going to post this link. You can grab it for yourself. We're going to get Pete on our show here pretty soon, so just kind of stand by for that. And here's the link that it came from. He just posted this just an hour ago. So he sent me like five text messages about it. So, but I had to prep for the show, so I haven't had a chance to actually get out there and show that. So here's the links, and here is the paper. Another thing that just came out just 2 weeks ago is from the White House. What kinds of technologies is America focusing on, and why should it focus on them? So here's the announcement from the White House. We follow national policy of the U.S. pretty closely because the stuff that happens at the Office of Science and Technology and a bunch of other organizations, that has ripple effects into the rest of the field. And so here is the document that goes along with that press release. I want to highlight that first, all the members of this document goes to, it's assigned to the Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy. It's assigned to these organizations I always find it interesting that NASA is called out separately because the Department of Commerce controls NASA. And I just find that I think it's interesting how they highlight that. But the key technologies, there's a bunch of language in here that's worth reading. But these are the key technologies. Space right here. It's an alphabetical list. At first, I was concerned that the space was being ignored, but it's an alphabetical list, so not ignored. A bunch of stuff you'd expect, advanced computing. And then if you scan into the list, these are the things that the administration is focusing on. And I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone, but it is really important to kind of point these things out. I think this is in space propulsion. I don't think this is launcher technology. Everybody in our field knows that PNT is critical life or death in space and on the ground. No surprise to entry, descent, and landing. I think cryogenic fluid management might surprise some people. Commoditized satellite buses might surprise some people. Those are things that I'm really happy to see the administration paying attention to. And with that, I'm going to stop kind of the policy section here, and we're going to bring in our guests. So just a moment here. Let me pull up my notes here. Arun, I'll bring you in just a moment here. I'm trying to find my file. Oops. I thought I already had this thing loaded up. Yeah, here we go. Stop sharing that. Bring you on. Hey, hi.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let me read off your bio here because it's pretty cool stuff. Arun has a background in aerospace engineering and has an MBA. He has been an analyst for a decade now, covering aerospace, defense, and security verticals, besides other markets such as construction, retail, and heavy machinery manufacturing. He has led the development of data analytics solutions for space market participants and has been tracking the space sector since 2013, which we're going to come back to that, 2013. He has supported government and commercial agencies with their financial decision-making with respect to market expansion and new product development objectives. He is currently working as a principal analyst with Aerospace and Defense Unit at BisResearch, a consulting firm specializing in AI-based analytics for businesses across markets. I'm really happy to have you here. We talked back in December, and it was just a fascinating conversation. So first, I want to just say thank you for being on this. It's 2 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning for you?
It's 6:45 a.m.
6:45 a.m. Well, thank you for being up quite so early. It is just after 5 in the evening for me. So we're on different parts of the world here. So thank you for coming on. I want to jump into your background. You know, how we do this is we talk about background first, how you got into this field, how you're doing what you're doing. What was the path that you took really from the beginning? It's really important to note that, you know, this sector, people get into the sector from a lot of different backgrounds, perspectives, visions. Tell me about your path.
Sure. My undergraduate, I did, aerospace engineering, and then I did my MBA at Mississippi State. And while I was there, I was also working as a research assistant on small satellite projects. And that's where I got introduced to space. And but when I returned home, my initial job was a senior associate, a business consultant with a small consulting firm. And that was a non-space role. And that's when I was covering construction, retail, and heavy machinery manufacturing. So I was helping companies do their quality audits and so on, both internal audits, financial and non-financial, and process consulting as such. And then I joined Frost and Sullivan as a defense analyst. That was my entry into the aerospace and defense domain, so to speak. And then I joined as a defense analyst. So the first markets that I started tracking was defense, and then I moved across aviation, commercial aerospace, security verticals, and so on. And I worked with Frost and Sullivan for about 8 years, and then last year in January I joined BisResearch as a principal analyst. So over the past decade, I have been covering these aerospace, defense, and security verticals.
Cool. That's cool about kind of your more recent stuff, but I want to go back in time further. Were you interested in space when you were at Mississippi State? Is that Ole Miss or is that a different school?
Mississippi State University, Starkville, Mississippi, not Ole Miss.
Okay. Not Ole Miss. So when you were back there, well, what brought you to Mississippi in the first place?
Oh, it was that research assistant position. I got an assistantship there, so I joined there. And at that time, Mississippi State University had a program in collaboration with Surrey Satellite Technology Limited. It's now part of Airbus. At this point, it was SSTL back then. And then there was this joint project, and we were investigating options for a lunar mission and so on. And as part of that, within Mississippi State, they were setting up a small satellite lab. Small satellite was introduced into the aerospace program there, and I was part of the research assistant team, which would set up the lab and help the students, and we would conduct those classes and the projects and the tests and so on. So it was more of CubeSat testing and integration activity. And there was SSTL's participation from the industry side as well. So they would come there and they would have workshops, and we would sit with them, learn from them, and then we would teach, and we would be working with the students. And so that was when I got introduced to the space side of things.
A little over 15 years ago. I mean, really, that's pretty new. I mean, sorry, that's pretty, because the field has changed so much. Most people are getting into it for the first time in the last 2 to 5 years. So 15 years ago is actually kind of, you're kind of one of the old dogs in the field. Just because
the CubeSat back then was slightly bigger. Just to give a perspective, the CubeSat today is this big, but it was the size of a youth soccer ball, slightly bigger. It was still called the CubeSat, and but a slightly larger CubeSat. The stack was still the same, but it was inside a little box, and the solar panels on the side. We would do that testing with halogen lamp, and if someone got an efficiency of 17%, then we would all huddle up and ask what went wrong.
So let's see, for everybody who doesn't have the history, the CubeSat standard came out of California. I think it was Cal Poly, if I remember right, maybe in San Diego also. And that standard came, it's now a standard that we all take for granted, but it was pretty new when you were working on it. I think it's about a 22-year-old standard. I think it came out in 2001. So if you were working on in 2007, 2008, that was brand new technology. Nobody knew what to do with that. So were you kind of puzzled by it when it first came online, or were you comfortable with it right from the beginning?
I don't think we were comfortable with it in any way, but we had the equipment and the manual, so it was basically three of us trying to figure out which one goes where, and we would have that manual, and the manual would say something, and we would spend the next hour looking for that within the where is that thing, where does that thing go. But I would be holding one wire. Okay, this needs to go somewhere. Where would that one? And then so it was more trial and error. So, the initial kit that we got trained on, we basically destroyed it in the process of learning. But then that was the overall experience, that putting that thing together and watch that thing come to life right in front of you. And then, we would just hang it from a pendulum style contraption. And then, that is where, okay, we would be trying all the attitude control and everything. And, it would be connected to our computers. And we would have this small graphic interface where we would have to do every movement separately. It's not a automated program, and then we see that thing happen, and then, okay, so this is how it is happening, and we go through that one round.
You're using a gravity simulation table, which is basically, if I can do it with my hands, it kind of looks like this, where there's a platform and a wall, and then it's suspended,
yes,
and moved as if it was a low gravity, zero gravity environment. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That was brand new tech then too. Like, we did stuff like that when we went to the moon, where we'd have astronauts like attached to walls and all these big contraptions. But I mean, the sophistication of modeling software and real world experience to back up the simulations, to back up the models, the physical models. And we've come a whole long ways since then. So that must have been pretty fun to pioneer that.
And we would parallelly have the mission design also going on. So at one end, we'll be working on, it used to be called Satellite Toolkit. I'm not sure how many remember that old name. Now, I think they call it Systems Toolkit, or I think it's part of ANSYS. I really don't know.
I think ANSYS bought, I don't know, they gobbled up a whole bunch of companies.
It used to be Satellite Toolkit, and it would only do satellite. There wasn't that UAV module. At that time, it was only STK, and they had given us that university student license at that time itself, and then we would use that.
Sorry, go ahead.
We would use that, and then there would be different missions that will be designing on top of it, and then just to probe our curiosities, the professors would give a very specific mission design, say, okay, these are the 3 ground stations that need to see this satellite at this point. Go see what the mission does, and then that would be like a highly elliptical Molniya orbit, and then we would do that really quickly. But then when we get the ground track data out, that's when we would notice that right about at apogee, when it is at its peak, at the highest point, it will have a view towards Russia as well. And then you would say, okay, this mission for some reason is designed such that when it is at the highest end, it can, there is some ground station at Russia that can view this as well. So it has to be the other way around, and we would have jokes about it, and so on. So
I was pretty amazed. I used the STK, the Satellite Toolkit. It was kind of a de facto standard in the early days. I used it at ISU 2008, International Space University, back in 2008. It was so clunky, and I know this much about orbital mechanics. Like that, I know almost nothing about orbital mechanics. But everything that I do know, I learned from the Satellite Toolkit STK. So it was a pioneering tool, right? I mean, we kind of take that stuff for granted now, but without it, we couldn't have evolved that CubeSat standard. So really, it wasn't a plan for you to get into space. You just happened to be at the right time, at the right place. That had the technology, because that stuff was not out in the world at most schools. It was just getting started. Sorry?
It was just getting started.
Yeah, it was just getting started. Yeah, I didn't actually think this is how naive I was back then. I did not think that the CubeSat standard was going to matter at all. Like, it felt like it was just an academic. It was a great way to get your papers published, but it wasn't going to have any real world impact.
And that perception stayed for quite a while I was at as an analyst with in my earlier role at Frost and Sullivan, I remember one of the conversations with a scientist, who has spent his entire career working on satellites and most part of it on small satellites. And he was, he was so deep inside the technology. He was saying, Arun, small satellites haven't succeeded commercially. I don't think they will ever come out commercially. But when he was making that point, planet alone had close to 150 satellites in orbit. And I was trying to no, that's not the world you are in right now. Things have changed. And from 2013 onwards, it was one quick fast forward. What would otherwise be a 25-year timeline, like
Yeah.
that entire change happened in a 5-year timeline.
Yeah, it did. It happened in 5 years. It was
Yeah.
amazing to watch.
Yeah.
At the same time, your professor was saying no big deal. I was talking to, I won't name him because people would know him, but a 3-star general at the Pentagon. Space Force wasn't there yet, so it was an Air Force general in charge of space. And I asked him, 2 questions, one focused on the moon and one focused on small sats. And his comment about small sats was, it's debris. It's just one more thing I have to avoid. And it's one thing I have to track and avoid. So don't talk to me about small sats. And then I talked to him about the moon. And he's like, my sphere of influence is the Earth and that much more, right? Like, here's the Earth, and this is how much I'm willing to pay attention to. And you're talking about, from here to the moon. He's like, no, I'm not even going to entertain that conversation. I'm just not going to. It was pretty frustrating because those are the days when I was shifting away from the Earth elevator to focus on the lunar elevator. And I really wanted the Air Force to pay attention, and they were definitely not. And this is a general that had, 3 stars seniority, and his opinion mattered. And his opinion was, small sats are debris, and we're not paying attention to the moon. And that was 2009 or 10. So a lot has changed. So that's really cool. I'm excited about your history. I think this stuff is important. So you got into space by accident. Had you been interested in space prior to that?
No, not really. Yeah.
No.
I was more an airplane guy.
Yeah, I was a nerd in high school for sure. I was aware of space, and I would skip high school to go watch space shuttles launch and land on television. But it didn't become a career until, I don't know, I was 31, 32 timeframe. So it's been my whole life since then. But no, I got into it pretty early, but I wasn't as young as you were to get into it. So good for you. Cool. I'm going to post your LinkedIn profile here if anybody wants to reach out to you. But let's kind of talk about what you're doing now. Let's talk about Frost and Sullivan for a second. For those that don't know, and you're going to tell them more about it, but they were one of the very first folks as actual analysts in the sector, in the space sector. There's Bryce. Bryce had a different name at the time. I forgot what their earlier name was. Space Capital has been watching it. And maybe there's 4 or 5 others. The Space Foundation, of course, has their kind of big document that they post every year. There's a couple others, Euroconsult, and I'm certain Astrolytical does some. So there's a few of them out there, but very few have got 10 years worth of tracking and history. So talk a little bit about Frost and Sullivan before we started getting to BIS.
Yeah, sure. So, I joined Frost as a defense analyst, and I was the only analyst when we relaunched the space program back in 2014-15. And it was me. The very first topic that was given to me was military SATCOM, and then I was, I would uh, grab every opportunity in team meetings to say, "Hey, small satellites, let's do something on small satellites. The small satellite market is growing." And no one would even consider giving me a vocal rejection. They would just move on. No one would call. And then I kept asking about it, and at one point my manager at that time, he said, credits to Stephen Webb for making it possible. He said, "Arun, you have been talking about small satellites so much, and there's nothing that we are observing in the market, but you seem to be curious about it. Go ahead, take 120 hours, do a small study on it. Let's see what the clients feel about it, and we can talk further if that grabs." And I titled this "Assessment of the Small Satellite Market," and that study got into the top 100 downloads of that year.
Nice.
And that's what got the attention of the team internally, and said, "Okay, so this thing is catching attention. Let's dive deeper." And then but the moment we got into the small satellite market, we realized, okay, earth observation, communication, very different animals, and we need to treat them separately, because the application, the way the markets operate, one earth observation, many companies, smaller constellations; communication domain, fewer companies, really large constellations. And at that time, that type of a constellation itself was considered practically impossible. It was a theory on paper that people would not even consider joking about. But right now, Starlink service is active. That's a different story. But back then, it was still fantasy. And so we would cover that one by one. And at that time, it was just me. I was the first analyst there, contributing to the space program there. And then we slowly grew, expanded our team, and we decided to establish that niche in the small satellite market, because we were starting really, really fresh. And then there are, you said, Euroconsult, and there are many other research groups who already have a broader and a stronger footprint in the domain. So we wanted to have a small blue ocean for ourselves. And there I was saying, let's do the small satellite, the new space market. At that time, the word new space would still be, I still write it that way. Not many people agree with me. New space as one word with a capital S in between. So I still write it that way, but not very so. In English, it's two words, new and space.
Wait just a second. So literally last night's program, the our client, the Mars Society, had their show, the Red Planet Live, and our show last night had Rick Tomlinson. Rick Tomlinson is literally actually the human being who invented the phrase "new space" at the Space Frontier Foundation. He wanted to differentiate old space, boring space, careful space of like Boeing and Lockheed and NASA and all the contractors. And he wanted to like, oh, let's be cool, let's be new, let's be sexy, and talk about new space. And that was super effective back in 2004, 2005, 2 decades ago. I do not think it's a useful phrase anymore. I think it actually muddies the water a lot, and I think it's pretty confusing. I like the phrase risk space versus safe space, right? So that so you've got let's say Boeing working on the International Space Station. That's a contract they can keep cashing from NASA over and over and over, and they have for 20 years, and it's got to be worth $30 billion, maybe $40 billion over that time frame. That's pretty safe space, right? On the other side, you've got SpaceX and Blue that are self-funding rockets that may or may not have clients, may or may not succeed, may or may not have missions. And that's about as risky as you can get. Liftport falls in the risk space. Most of the companies in the sector fall into that category. So I don't think new space is a term that's useful anymore, because I don't think it tells the whole story very well. But I also don't like the semantics of risk space and safe space. One, it doesn't roll off the tongue. Two, it doesn't really fully tell the story. So it hasn't really picked up any traction. But I don't think new space does the job anymore. I think it's, Arun, you can remember with the days when people used to call their companies .coms, right? Like there's nobody has a .com company anymore, right? That term doesn't have any value. I think that new space is in the same boat. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. So what happened back then was, even in 2013, 2015 timeline, even internally, when I would speak with my sales colleagues and so on, they would say, Arun, nobody is interested in science projects. And that's what they would call it. So, all of these were startups where, they might have registered as a business, but the management team would essentially be the industry principals, the very founders, would be the tech developers. And, it wasn't a proper business setup where the R&D would be a separate team. They will be in charge of product development, and that's a professional management team who would handle the corporate activities, and they would be doing the front end. And, it wasn't that setup. 3 to 5 engineers together, like they are everything. they are the manufacturing plant, they are the management, they are everything. And then maybe they have like 250 300K of seed money that they brought in, and that's about it. And then so there was a bunch of these happening, and they were being stereotyped as science projects that no one cares about. And I think at that time, the term new space, of course, new space really took them forward. It gave them a collective identity. It separated them from the crowd. I don't remember anyone using old space as to segregate the rest of the space industry. This group was, really wanting to be part of the larger space industry. They didn't want to create an ecosystem for themselves. They have now, but back then they wanted to be part of the space community, but they were just discarded as, science projects that no one cared about. And then slowly, as they started establishing their success, they started putting tech demonstration satellites, and their capability is, I know of a small satellite operator, a nano satellite operator, who has delivered or enabled financial transactions downstream, and that's narrowband service. And so we are talking shoebox style size satellites delivering these capabilities in today's time. So this was completely unheard of, and no one would even imagine. But we, so many things have been made possible, and I think that led to this number of companies growing. And then cheaper manufacturing, that enabled, many other Silicon Valley startups, their core IP was downstream. They did not have the satellite expertise, and then right now they have space as a service. There are companies who would design, build, launch, and operate on anyone's behalf, and you would get your data in API format, and you can focus on your downstream analytic solutions and so on. So groups without satellite expertise can now become or evolve into space companies. They can have their payloads in orbit. That's very much possible. So I think the word new space gave them that identity, that eventually they had to have some identity to catch the attention of the investors. And I think the new space economy or the new space identity helped them achieve that. But there are companies with whom, when I speak these days, I tell them, okay, some years back I used to put you under the innovative startup section on the slide that I do, but these days I don't put your name there because you are not a startup anymore.
Right. Well, great momentary segue. I'm going to just jump in for a second, because you're talking about space as a service now. This is the biggest contract that I'm aware of. It happened today. And it's a fascinating story about a startup that is basically providing building satellites as a contract for other organizations. So
Mhm.
I'm just going to post that in the link, but that's exactly right. That uh, there is very speedy maturity in this industry, and it's happening right before our eyes. So let's talk about, we have about 20 minutes left. Let's talk about BIS. Let's talk about what you're doing there.
Sure.
If you want to talk about the spreadsheet that you sent over, I'm happy to do that.
Mhm.
I've got it posted. Tell me about BIS and what you're working on now. I know you, let me put a caveat in there. I know that you can't tell about current clients and current research because those people pay for that knowledge. But what are you able to share that our community would be interested in?
Mhm. Sure, sure. So I work as a principal analyst within the aerospace and defense unit at BisResearch, and I am in charge of the market sizing, forecasting, estimations, research planning, and management, and so on. And we have two different streams. One is our syndicated reports, which is basically we pick up many different topics from each vertical, and then we track those markets, we write and publish reports about them, largely on existing markets, but we do have a special focus on emerging markets, things that we expect to happen in the coming years. For example, we recently published a study, in orbit refueling services. The capability is still quite new. Of course, there has been a few life extension missions that have happened, non-cooperative to a large extent, but we realized that as the satellite docking systems and the refueling ports become standardized in the manufacturing domain, in-orbit refueling will be an active kicking market. So we do publish reports on emerging markets, and we make it a point to cover them before they come into existence. And we did publish one on space situational awareness. But apart from it, we also cover the existing markets, the launch vehicle industry, who's launching how many rockets, and who's manufacturing how many over the years. So the 140 to 160 launch vehicles, across small, medium, heavy, super heavy, and so on. And then we have a satellite manufacturing database, which sits on what we call as the satellite launch forecast, which we basically track all the launches, and then at any given time we would have a view of who's going to launch how many satellites over the next 10 years. And then that is the starting point for pretty much all satellite based studies. So if any client has a query, if they make a product, let's say a reaction wheel for a 200 kilogram, or that microsatellite segment, if anyone has a query such as, okay, what's the demand for this component in the earth observation domain in that 200 to 300 kg satellites in the Europe region, we would have that data ready. So so that those databases that we maintain, that is the starting point for pretty much all the market investigations that we do. But we are also now evolving a AI based platform. We are calling it Insight Monk, and where we are, it is essentially a artificial intelligence based refined search for our clients. So going away from Google, you go to Google, you type, you have a whole lot of information at you, and you have to parse through it. But our clients are very specific niche. They are looking for very specific publications of a certain type. So we have built the system that would do it on their behalf. And so once they are on the platform and they do that search, they will have it in three segments. One, here's what public domain reports in this topic, and here are the reports that we have published, and here are other resources that you can go through, and so on. And that is all. We are also expecting that platform to evolve as a professional social network, so to speak, where they can post a question, and anyone can answer. We would also be watching those questions, and if someone has a question on healthcare, the healthcare analyst team would jump in and contribute, and anyone else, we have industry experts who are part of Insight Monk at this point, and they would also join in, and they can also chip in. So our objective is to enable industry experts engage with their peers, while also having access to relevant information besides our reports. And that's what we are trying to create, that ecosystem for effective communication between relevant industry experts. At this point in time, everything is becoming cross-functional. So everyone is trying to do everything. Everything is coming to their plate. So the need for interacting with relevant professionals across domains is growing, and we believe our Insight Monk platform will help in that regard. So that's what we do at BIS Research.
So tell me a little bit about your clients, because you told me when we were on the phone back in December something that really surprised me. I'm not gonna lead with that, but tell me who your clients are. Who's buying this data, and what decisions are they making based on the data?
Mhm. Yeah, so we have commercial and government agencies as our client. Most of them are commercial companies. So if we take the space industry, for example, space market participants are the clients. So most of our output, when we talk about syndicated reports that we publish, what they contain is the demand assessment. How much of a certain product is going to be taken up over the timeline, and how does that look like in dollar form, and how does that demand vary across different product segments and across regions. And the segmentation is really relevant for the market. If you take in orbit servicing market, the regional segmentation is pretty much insignificant because that's in space, but there the segmentation is more on the mass class wise. How many earth observation satellites might need it, how many communication satellites might need it, and so on. So relevance. So basic questions that our clients usually have when they have a product, they want to understand, okay, what's the demand for this product looking like, where are our customers, who has the money, and how is this demand expected to grow. So they keep procuring these syndicated reports in an ongoing basis because we keep updating it.
Right.
And the primary purpose they use it for is to keep track of the demand for their product and to identify new customers in some cases. And then apart from these syndicated reports, we also do custom deep dive projects, which is where clients would have, hey, here's a product that we are planning to develop, and we are trying to go after, this is the definition of our target audience, can you help us find them? And then we do that market survey and we build that database for them. Okay, here are the companies, and this is their portfolio, this is what they do, and based on your definition of your product, this is your larger audience, and this group is your core audience, who will be more curious to know about this technology, because they have a higher likelihood of using this technology. They will have the need for this technology before anyone else, and then we hand it over to them. So it's more demand assessment. In some cases it would
Okay.
also be a supply assessment. They would want to understand the competitive landscape, who's doing who, and then that's more of a ecosystem assessment, so to speak. And then, okay, in each of these segments, these are the industry participants and this is their portfolio, and so on. But we do that. We also help them with technological assessments. In some cases they would say, we have a certain technology that we are already delivering to our customers. We want to understand how the uptake of this technology will vary moving forward. It's not tangible in terms of number of products. It's how this technology will be applied, and what use cases where it will be used moving forward. In that case, it's a tech assessment, a qualitative assessment. So we start our investigation by looking into the patents. What are the most recent patents filed historically, what areas or what versions of the technology patents have been filed, what does that patent landscape tell us, where is this technology headed. And then we do a market survey and understand, okay, here's what, because patent is a more reflection of the R&D side of activities. But then when we speak with the industry participants, we get a feel of, okay, what's happening on the ground right now, and what is the gap. So where is this headed? When will some of these patents actually materialize into fully operable solutions, and which type of patents are more likely to succeed, and which are those industry participants who are going to be the early adopters, and so on. So we do that sort of assessment as well. So those would be deep dive, very specific, customer specific requirement that we do besides the syndicate.
So there's kind of two kinds of research. There's custom research, and then there's kind of public research. So you'll do this for a client who has a particular problem, particular requirement, and then this one, you'll take this information and make some elements available to the public. Do I understand your business model?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So if I wanted, and I'm just going to use myself as an example for Liftport, if we wanted to have an understanding of cargo going to the moon, which as far as I know, there is not a document like that. I've looked. We could contract BIS to go look for that. And then some of that information, we would get first access because we commissioned it, but then some of it would be made available to public reports. That's kind of how you work, correct?
Yeah, so we have our internal databases in that regard. So you refer to the lunar mission. So we have a database which we call as the deep space mission database. About 95 missions we have already documented, and we are looking into that. So for that particular query that you just defined, that would be the starting point of it. So the data that we have within our database, yes, that we use for pretty much all research activities that we do. But then when we develop a deliverable specifically for you, and if it is a custom project, then we would obviously be maintain that as a confidential document. What you get is what you alone get, but then the base information is already coming from public domain. That belongs to everyone. What are the lunar missions, the Artemis program, the different phases of it, and so on. How we interpret it, so for that query we would conduct very specific discussions with industry stakeholders, and that's when we will confirm, okay, so this is what is likely to happen, and this is what they are going to do, and then we would finalize on, okay, so much of hardware is going to be needed. The initial orbiter missions not so much, but once they start building the station there, and once they have a few soft landings done, they are going to have infrastructure on the surface, then they are going to do back and forth lander back and forth missions there, and at that time they will need a lot of supplies. And if something is identified uniquely, and then that would speed up the process. They might want to, if they find some material which has more value here, then there would be a need for bringing it back here, and then that space infrastructure would also be kicking in. And so what you would get in the end would be it will be exclusively for you. But then the base data that we take from the database, that is something that we consider our core IP, and then that is a common.
Yeah, absolutely. You did the work. You've got use for it. Again, trying to be cognizant of time. We've got about 5 minutes left. The thing that surprised me when you talked about, you've got government customers and you've got a lot of industry clients. That report that I just theoretically came up with, what's the range of a price tag for that? If somebody were to be a client, and then what would be the private report and then the public report price tags? What would that look like for the industry?
Okay, so for our syndicated reports, they usually fall in the $5,000 to $6,000 range, 5,250, if I remember it correctly. But
and that's US dollars, right?
Yeah, that's the syndicated reports. But when it comes to custom reports, it all comes down to how much effort estimation. So here's how the process works. So we would have a preliminary discussion where we will capture the requirement, and we will try to understand, okay, what sort of information are you looking for? And then we would huddle up internally, and then we would decide what we would do to actually compile that information, and what needs to be done. In some cases it would be entirely primary based, in which case we would have to do like 20-30 interviews. And from that standpoint, easily for each interview anywhere between 5 to 6 hours of effort goes in. But over the calendar it does spread over 2 months, because scheduling so many interviews does take time. But in some cases not so much. We could do with 10-15 interviews, but then it's more of collecting a lot of secondary information from public domain sources. So how much we do an effort assessment, and then we come down to, okay, how many days it is going to take us to do that, and then that's what it usually gets built. So roughly we would say $400 to $450 per analyst day, to give you a feel of it. So if the effort comes down to 20 working days, you can do the math at your end, $400 to $450 a day.
So that's the thing that made me kind of like a light bulb go off in my head. Whether it's $5,000 or $10,000 for original research, or whether it's $5,000 for supporting research, you've got venture capitalists that are going out there writing, $500,000 checks, $1 million checks, $5 million checks, and they're not your core clients. So it makes me wonder, like, if I was writing $500,000 or $1 million checks to spend $5,000 to $15,000 to just have somebody else check my math, evaluate my math. You'd say it takes 2 months to do a report, maybe 3 months to do a report. Okay, maybe they're worried about speed, but at the same time, like me, if I'm writing $1 million check, I'm going to do my homework. So that was really surprising to me that that was not one of your core clients, was the VC community. And I know that the VC community is small, and we can probably name the top 10 space VCs together. But there are hundreds, thousands. There's 15, 1,800 space companies being tracked by Space Capital, and most of them do not have your deep knowledge of space, right? So they're writing checks based on guesswork. That's all I can come up with. So anyway, I don't want to like belabor that, but it was a really big surprise to me when I was talking earlier.
I think we need to put that in perspective. I agree with you. But our presumption is, they might not be part of our core clients, but for some of our competitors, they might be. And this is our presumption. So they need to have that data from somewhere. If not from us, it has to be from our competitors at least. But what I have noticed is these larger investment groups, they have a standard practice of collecting this in market information in a cyclical basis. I have helped agencies like Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan and so on. They would come up with, they would have really large funds to look into and say, hey, we are considering an investment in A&D. This is the domain. What's the landscape looking like, and what are the key top things I have delivered in my earlier roles? But they do it in a cyclic basis. But when we come down to the small scale investors, they do their homework, but I presume some of it they do it themselves, or they are, at least my presumption is that they are not having a very broad capture of that data. So oftentimes these really, this is where the big difference is, and we are trying to educate the new space crowd as such. A lot of these founders, they know the market, they have developed the technology, but then they don't have the same insight or perspective that we third party analysts have. And oftentimes they feel, okay, I developed this product, I know my customer, I'm speaking with the customer, I don't need a middleman to tell me what the demand is going to look like. That's not how this is understood. But once that startup becomes an established corporation, really large aerospace organizations, they know how we operate, and they have a specific strategy team that does it, and they have a market intelligence team who does what we do, and then they buy our reports to validate their activities. And I know that all our clients who buy our reports, they do buy reports from our competitors as well. So so there are companies who buy all the reports in the market, and then they look at, okay, because every report, the numbers mean nothing without the story behind. And so you could have a 40 billion number, I could have a 4 billion number, both could be right with very different story behind.
Different
And
assumptions.
both needs to be brought in. Yeah. And the large corporations, they have, because they have, it all comes down to how they structure their market intelligence activities. Is it going to be one person just looking on one report and then making a decision, or is it a team which continuously tracks it? Because once it becomes an elaborate process, that's where the need for multiple data input comes in, and that's where we chip in. So until that moment, right now we are trying to educate the new space crowd as well. Hey, this is what you can do. We can help you do this. Oftentimes we do, what we get as a response is, hey, we know our customers, and it's a small world they operate in, and for that reason they tend to presume that's the only world they are going to operate in. But that's not reality. They are going to grow. There is going to be competition. Things are going to change. And but there are some startups which have that experienced stakeholders who in their previous roles have interacted with analysts. They know what we do, and they know the importance of this validation activity that needs to happen. but it is the younger founders who are still yet to get on the same page. But what we have noticed is, as the company grows, eventually they will become our clients.
Good. All right. With that, we're going to close it off. Arun, thank you very much for being a part of our show. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation. I really, I was. I don't know if you know how we got connected. I got an email from one of your associates and I got connected via LinkedIn, I think. And then you asked that I be a part of one of your interviews for one of your segments, one of your research projects, which is overdue. I haven't actually done that yet. Happy to do that. But, it's kind of amazing how the serendipity of the world and the internet kind of connects people that wouldn't meet otherwise. And so I'm really glad that we started talking back in December. So let's keep this conversation going. As we know more about our conference, probably going to be at the end of May, I'll definitely invite you to be a part of that. Thanks a lot, Arun. Well, I was about to say have a good night, but you're starting your day. So you have a good day. I'm going to close out for the night.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me. Yes, our relationship will continue. Let's stay in touch.
Okay. Have a good night. Or have a good morning.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.